Well, before the break, Barito Andrew was giving you traffic updates as it was happening from the Wandegea traffic lights. Wandegea areas there. Wandegea routes to Kamocha, Mulago, routes to Gayaza Road, to Makerere University, and to the CBD as well. But, well, besides the situations, as we get back here to Smart Means Business, before that, just to remind you that, hey, investment has been made easier with Zabu. Zabu, a platform by Altex East Africa, says make your money count by doing something new this morning. Well, Altex East Africa is saying your money, with Zabu, is saying your money, your future. Now, if you're to look at the future of banking and the future of investment, the best way is for you to invest your money into something that is intangible, but it's actually making your money grow. So with just a minimum of 15,000 Uganda shillings after registering with your NIN, in the next 24 hours, you'll be ready to invest in any bond and security with Zabu. Markets open at 8:15 a.m. and close at 3:15 p.m. East African Standard Time. The market is closed during weekends and during public holidays. So it is time for you to look out for all those particular situations and invest your money. Okay, that is for Zabu. Good morning again. Good morning, Uganda. Hope you're doing well. Now let's get into Karibu, East Africa. So apparently, before we go into that, just to remind you that this is your daily Kickstarter, where we do kickstart off with business information as early as 6:30 in the AM from Monday to Friday to give you all the updates as they are happening across the business world. And tell you what, now we look at Karibu, East Africa, where we look at stories making headlines across the East African bloc. Let's start with the Kenyan Treasury, which says that the country has no room for fresh borrowing, and it's something that has caught attention from the Kenyans, that has caught attention of the people of Kenya. So it is clearly something that most of the people should be working upon. But besides that situation, Kenya's National Treasury has double doubted on its efforts to swap the country's short-term debt with longer-term issuance, which they do believe is definitely going to be safer for their economy. Now, this comes barely a week after it commenced a debt swap that will see 87.8 billion Kenyan shillings, that is approximately $714.6 million worth of short-term debt converted into long-term debt to definitely ease the pressure it is experiencing from maturities. Now, if you look at this, last week the Kenyan government floated its first switch bond since June 2020 during the lockdown. By this situation, the Treasury Cabinet Secretary Njuguna Ndugu said that Kenya was a little under a wiggle room for fresh borrowing. Now, a situation that has been aggravated by the multiplicity of shocks to the economy, including the ongoing drought, as well as the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic and the Russian-Ukraine war. But besides that, a fortnight ago, President William Ruto directed the Treasury not to borrow from the domestic market at rates above 10%. Professor Ndungu further stated that the targeted 300 billion Kenyan shillings, that is approximately 2.4 billion US dollars worth of budget cuts, is anticipated in the Ruto's government debut supplementary budget that have now so far been calibrated to ensure that it does not derail the economy's growth momentum. According to a circular issued by the Treasury on November 7th, by the way, addressed to all cabinet secretaries and accounting officers, the Kenyan government is pursuing aggressive rationalization of the recurrent expenditure for the current financial year. But also, the areas earmarked for slashes include expenditures on foreign travel and training for the remaining 3 quarters of the current financial year, especially for the legislators and other public servants. Now, the economy of Kenya grew by 6.8% and 5.2% in the first and second quarters, respectively. So if you're to look at how it has been growing steadily from 5.2%, from 6.8% to 5.2%. So that has been a growth that has not been a sharp one, but however, a steady growth in there from the land of Hakuna Matata. Well, before we leave Kenya, the next report is regarding President William Ruto, who has launched a flagship credit scheme for the poor in the country. The Kenyan President, William Samoei Ruto, launched yesterday a low-interest credit scheme to boost financial access for the country's poorest citizens, fulfilling a key campaign promise made to his voters. Now, Ruto, who once sold chickens on the roadside, had painted the August 9 polls as a battle between the ordinary hustlers and the elite political dynasties, and had vowed to lift the lives of Kenyans battling high inflation and unemployment, out of which he's already taken center stage. Now, besides that, the 50 billion shillings, that is approximately 408 billion US dollars, Hustler Fund will offer personal loans of up to 50,000 Kenyan shillings to any Kenyan with a cell phone and a mobile money account, with interest charged at 8% a year. Ruto did reveal that the fund was part of his government's plan to create opportunities for millions at the bottom of our economic pyramid to work their way up and fulfill their aspirations. The fund will eventually also offer small-scale enterprises and startups access to credit, with these loans set to be launched by the end of May next year. Now, slowly moving down, the new fund will require borrowers to set up a savings account, with 5% of the loan amount automatically going into a personal savings scheme, to which the government will contribute a maximum of 6,000 shillings per year. Since his inauguration in September, Ruto has apparently struggled to implement his campaign promises in a country that is facing record drought, cost of living crisis, and a 70 million debt mountain, that is $70 billion debt mountain that he found from his particular former boss, Uhuru Kenyatta. Now, he has slashed food and fuel subsidies introduced by predecessor Uhuru Kenyatta and pledged to overhaul Kenya's income tax regime to higher earners. And so the higher earners will have to pay more to help reduce inequality in tax payment. Now, Kenya is the most dynamic economy in East Africa, by the way, but many of these people endure financial hardships, with about a third of the population living in poverty, with the East African community having Kenya as the strongest of the economies. Now, prices for basic goods rocketed following the COVID pandemic, and in response of the war in Ukraine, and unemployment remains a major problem, particularly among the young people, by the way. So inflation soared to a 5-year high of 9.6% in October, while the currency is at a record low at around 122 shillings to the US dollars. Lastly, from Karibu, East Africa, this particular report is heading to Tanzania, as seed farms have blamed the influx of the Tanzania vegetables in Kenya on the 16% duty. So seed companies are blaming the influx of vegetables from Tanzania on the cheap cost of production in the neighboring country, as it does not change the 16% duty on tomatoes and onion seeds, having a negative impact on the 15 billion shilling industry. So Seed Trade Association of Kenya, an umbrella body that is actually bringing together all the seed processors in the country, says that the value-added tax levied on vegetable seeds locally has made Kenya's produce uncompetitive in the market. Now, START chairman Humphrey Chiruya says that onions, tomatoes, and other vegetables from Tanzania have become common in Kenya and are way cheaper if you're to look at if you're to compare what is produced locally to what is imported from Tanzania. Now, for instance, a kilogram of tomatoes in Kenya is selling at 40 Kenyan shillings, while the one procured from Tanzania is trading at 30 Kenyan shillings. Now, locally produced onions sell at 63 Kenyan shillings, while those imported from neighbors are going for 55 shillings. So they look at the change is clearly not too much of that, and they feel there is something to be worked upon. Now, Tanzania does not change value-added tax on vegetable seeds, and most of the farm inputs, by the way, such as chemicals, make the cost of production in the country much cheaper. Tanzania, and the East African Community Protocol, is allowed to export goods to Kenya duty-free. For many years, Kenya has been relying on imported seeds to meet the local demand from her farmers, and move that increase the cost of production within the times that have been coming up. And that is it for Karibu, East Africa. Now let's cross over across the borders and see what is making headlines on the international scene. Starting with the international scene, we go north of the East African Community region, not north, but east of the East African Community region, as we fast stretch to the Horn of Africa. Somalia has promised incentives in a bid to attract more investors into the country. The leaders of the federal government of Somalia is with its international partners and a cross-section of Somalis did gather in the capital on Monday and Tuesday for the country's first ever international investment conference, and an opportunity for the world to appreciate the progress being made by Somalia on the political and the economic front. Now, President Mohamud highlighted the efforts of his government to create a favorable investment environment to attract foreign direct investment through constitutional governance and stability based on the rule of law and democracy as the country rebuilds after years of conflict. And this particular summit was under the theme Unlocking Sectoral Investments to Accelerate Economic Growth. Now, the conference is organized by the Federal Ministry of Planning, Investment and Economic Development in partnership with the private sector and development partners, and is supported by the United Nations in Somalia as a potential for investment. Now, in his remarks at the opening day of the conference, the Deputy Special Representative of the UN General to Somalia, Resident and Humanitarian Coordinator, that is Adam Abdelmola, did note that the investment conference was in line with the objectives of the United Nations in Somalia to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals Agenda of 2030 and was aligned with the Sustainable Development Cooperation Framework between the UN and Somalia. Now, the United States Ambassador to Somalia, Larry E., as well as Andre Jr., who was one of the keynote speakers during the key summit, did particularly reveal that if you're to look at this, that Somalia qualifies for debt relief through the highly indebted poor countries initiative, and they will ensure that they flow of significant resources to support reconstruction efforts in there. The Somalian diaspora continues to play an important role in providing much needed financial remittances. Now, these financial remittances, which are key to boosting economic growth in the trade, hospitality, banking, fishing, and real estate sectors. Then also, if you're to look at the recent past, Somalia has focused on improving infrastructure, regulating import and export standards, as well as assertion of international and regional trade mechanisms such as the World Trade Organization, the African Continental Free Trade Area. And when you look at the gathering that had that Somalia's strategic location with the longest coastline in Africa for trade and market access and its endowed natural resources makes the country a prime investment destination with opportunities in priority sectors such as ICT, then banking, finance, fisheries, and agribusiness. So in his address at the closing day of the conference, the Prime Minister of Somalia, Hamza Abdi Bare, expressed the government's commitment to implement legislative, economic, and security reforms to enhance the ease of doing business and create a favorable investment climate. Now, away from Somalia, we head to the south of the continent. We look at South Africa, as the South African panel has released President Cyril Ramaphosa's farm cash scandal report. This has led a three-member panel set to inquire if South African President Cyril Ramaphosa should be impeached after millions of dollars in cash were discovered at his private farm, submitted its recommendation to the Parliament on 30th. That was yesterday. In June, it emerged that an estimated $4 million was robbed at the farm back in 2020, raising questions about how the billionaire president acquired the cash and whether he had declared it. Now, the panel formed in September sought to find any preliminary evidence of wrongdoing by the president. While Ramaphosa has confirmed that the robbery occurred, he said that the cash was from proceeds from the sales of game. The timing of the scandal could hardly be worse, as the president is less than a month away from an elective conference that will decide if he gets on to run for the second term on the governing African National Congress's ticket at the 2024 polls in South Africa. Now, the inquiry is separate from a criminal investigation that police are conducting and which Ramaphosa has firmly welcomed. The report will be debated in the National Assembly on December 6th next week, according to the Speaker of Parliament, Nosiviwe Mapisa Ngakula, in a report by Reuters. So when you look at some of the key assessment by the panel, the Chief Justice and the panel chairman, Sadil Ngukombo, said at the end of the recommendations that dragging the president before an impeachment process is a very huge decision. It cannot be done on, it has to be something tangible. Okay, now lastly, from the news we head to following updates on the timeline. It is something that you've been able to experience. Now, Elon Musk has said Apple has altered most of its advertising on Twitter and accused the company of threatening to remove the platform from its App Store. The feud comes as many companies have halted spending on Twitter amid concerns about Musk's content moderation plans for the site. Apple has not responded to requests for comment, and then Musk said Twitter has seen a massive drop in revenue, blaming activists for pressurizing advertisers. And in a series of tweets on Monday, he accused Apple of censorship and criticized its policies, including the change it levies on that particular purchases made on its App Store. He appealed directly to Apple CEO, asking what is going on here at Tim Cook. Now, the owner of the social media platform also claimed Apple had threatened to withhold Twitter from its App Store, but did not say why. Musk, who purchased Twitter for $44 billion last month, is under pressure as companies halt spending. He has said he hopes to make money by turning Twitter verification into a paid subscription service of around $8. And then if you're to look at that particular one, he currently has the vast majority of the site's revenue, which is coming from advertising. Now, the Washington Post reported Apple was the top advertiser on Twitter, spending $48 million on ads, and the social network in the first quarter of 2022 made lots of money from Apple. Now, also, besides that, Media Matters, a watchdog site, reported last week that the half of Twitter's top advertisers had pulled their advertising on Twitter after concerns about the direction of Twitter, which is something to worry about from there. So Musk, ever since he took over as Twitter CEO, lots of questions in there. Of course, he's faced criticism, but he's been able to boldly reply to most of the tweets that are publicly attacking the platform, as well as him as the owner. Okay, that is it for the SMB International News this morning, but this is your daily Kickstart. I'm Jerome Paul Sonko in here. You're watching SMART24 TV. We are on mainstream channel 394, that is on Go TV, and DSTV channel 372. We happen every single day, Monday to Friday, from 6:30 a.m. to 10 a.m. and we drive you into the world of business as it is happening with all the updates that matter. Well, after the break, I do have the business quotes, I've got the business tips as well, and also looking steadily at the social media trends. But better yet, we do have more updates. But remember, we'll look at inflation as a report that was released by the Uganda Bureau of Statistics on regards to Uganda's inflation rise and decrease. So stick around, I'll have more of that coming up shortly afterwards. But do remember, you can as well go onto our website www.smart24.tv to get more business updates, and as well the YouTube channel is Smart24 TV Live. Please do remember to subscribe. Good morning.